Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on a loaded Tuesday afternoon. A lot to get into. We're going to talk about the NFL Combine. We're going to talk about a huge week for Georgia basketball, maybe the biggest week for Georgia basketball since the 2008 SEC tournament. We're going to talk about Georgia baseball. Welcome back on Olivia Sayer. And then the second half of the show, we are doing our annual spring breakouts draft. Super excited to do this. I think it's definitely one of my favorite episodes we do every year, getting a chance to pick the Bulldogs that we think will stand out once spring practice gets started. But guys, I just from the jump, we're talking about spring practice. We are a week away from spring practice. Ben, can you believe we are already back talking about Georgia football again?
I had this thought before we were recording, as I was getting ready for the show, I was like, we're going to be talking spring football on this episode. Like, I can't believe we're already here. I'm fired up about it. Like when we were texting offline about Pro Day coming up here shortly and the SEC basketball tournament, like, we're in an underrated, great period of Georgia sports, of things that are going on. So, yeah, I'm fired up. I don't know. I feel a little extra juice today.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it's, we're talking about stuff that's about to happen. It's not just, hypotheticals. And to your point, a great point in the year and the calendar, and we wind up closing it out with G-Day and the Masters that same weekend. So it'll be fun. Kipp, how pumped are you for us to be talking about Georgia football again?
Yeah, I don't think have you guys really gotten to see Gunner as QB1 in practice before? I think I got to see him a little bit, and this is kind of be your first time, so I'm excited for you guys and everyone to kind of see. I know he hasn't earned it yet, but I feel pretty good about him going into spring practice as the guy getting most of the starter reps, but also just seeing Ryan Puglisi out there as well. I mean, stepping into big roles for both of them. So getting to see those quarterbacks throw, it's kind of it's a new era for Georgia football. I like the CBS Sports outlook for the spring that they released a couple of days ago, just saying clean slate for Georgia football. A lot of people were, kind of have a negative connotation about the fact that Carson Beck's in Miami. Georgia's coming off maybe back-to-back disappointing seasons, but there are some positives here in that they have a chance to change it up offensively and showcase some new guys and put a new product on the field. So I just think it's a really intriguing part of Kirby Smart's tenure right now, just having maybe a quarterback competition, but I mean, he's only had 3-4 guys really start for him since he got to Georgia. So I think anytime you have a potential quarterback competition, it just adds a little bit extra intrigue to a program that already has the spotlight on it every year.
Yeah, the thing that's been interesting, I've started my positional preview stories over at Dogs 24/7, and trying to project the depth chart and trying to just get a feel. A point that Kipp was just making. There's going to be a lot of new faces. Whoever wins these battles, there's going to be a lot of first-time starters. I mean, heck, on Tuesday I wrote about the offensive line, and we're going to talk about some of the former linemen in a second, but they lost 4 starters to the NFL. So it's like no matter how you kind of line it up or who's starting where, that's a whole lot of new faces, and super excited to get spring practice started next week, and the countdown is on for sure. All right, Kipp, I mentioned some of those former Bulldogs. There were 14 former Dogs in Indianapolis last week for the NFL Combine. Very productive few days as we expected for those Georgia players as they look to either shore up their NFL draft stock or really just make sure it stayed where it was at. So I'll start with you, Kipp. Who do you think helped their case the most? Who do you think did enough to really bump up their draft stock based on what they did in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I think you're right when you kind of preface it by saying a lot of guys are just trying to solidify their stock, because the guys that, put up big numbers at the combine were kind of the guys we thought would put up big numbers at the combine. I mean, Jared Wilson, one of the most athletic, performances from an interior offensive lineman you've ever seen. I think that Tate Ratledge performed really well. The fact that Next Gen Stats said that the two best athleticism scores coming out of the combine were those two Georgia interior offensive linemen. Says a lot. It also just shows, how frustrating it was that you didn't get the healthy version of that offensive line. And everyone kind of points to, if Georgia had such athletic offensive line, why didn't they play better last season? And I think that's where you kind of show, you didn't get the version that you thought you would going into the fall. But I think really, if you're looking at guys that probably improved their stock a lot, I look at Trevor Etienne, the fact that, he ran really well. 4.43 is an outstanding time for him, because he was a guy that I thought, as far as short area quickness, I knew that, a shuttle time from him will be good. But as far that explosiveness and top end speed, you didn't really have a chance to see that last season. So I think for him to go out there and put a solid time like that at 5'8", I think 5'9", 198 pounds, really kind of gets him into the mix for the third, fourth round. And I think also just Ty Ingram Dawkins, we also knew that he would perform really well, but he really got himself in the mix there as far as 3-4 defensive ends, probably second, third round, which is just really impressive, because not eye-popping numbers, but basically one year is in the rotation as a starter, but he goes out there and runs a 4.8, 640, a 4.34 shuttle. It has a 36-inch vertical and over a 10-foot broad jump. So those numbers kind of tell you that even though he's a little undersized at 6'5", 275 pounds, teams that run an odd front, they're going to put him high on the board. And I think he's going to hear his name called a lot earlier than any of us expected.
Yeah, think about when we talked about the draft decisions. I felt like the two guys that we were sort of like, we're kind of surprised, were Trevor Etienne and Ty Ingram Dawkins. And, give both of those guys a lot of credit. In a sense, they sort of bet on themselves. And to this point, it's paid off. I mean, you mentioned Ty Ingram Dawkins had a great showing in Indy. Trevor did as well. And Trevor did that coming off of a really, really strong Senior Bowl. So it's hard to argue against their decisions to do so. And yeah, I think Ty Ingram Dawkins has done a fantastic job of upping his stock, because Kipp, I think when we talked about this before, we're like, 5th round pick, like we don't really have a great sense of where he's going to go. And man, he did himself a huge favor. A couple of guys I wanted to just mention: Michael Williams, a guy that didn't really do much there at the combine. He's going to be a guy we watch at Pro Day, but talked about how hurt he was last year working on that ankle. I think he said, at points he felt like he was playing at less than 60%. And that just shows you how productive he was in spite of that. I mean, I thought he, especially considering that he missed time, it was already impressive what he did. Now knowing just how hurt he was and playing through it, I thought that was impressive. And I do think that made an impression on NFL teams that, look, this guy's going to grind through it. I mean, could any of us have been shocked had Michael said, look, I'm going to shut this down, or at the very least, hey, I'm going to wait about a month and try to come back? It would have been understandable, but he didn't do that. He worked really hard for his team, and I think that made an impression on folks, and he'll look to show at Pro Day that he is healthy and that he's worth a first-round pick. The other guy I want to shout out was Malachi Starks. Just looking at some of the NFL next-gen numbers, first among the safeties in the short shuttle, first in the gauntlet drill, first in the line drill, first in the W drill, first in the Terrell Austin drill. I mean, I'm a big Malachi Starks guy when it comes to this draft. If the Atlanta Falcons had a chance to get him and use him to shore up that secondary, I'd be really excited. I think that Malachi is a guy that, is just going to make plays wherever he ends up. And I think that there's a lot of reason to be excited about Malachi. Ben, any thoughts on the NFL Combine, any of these Bulldogs that really caught your attention?
I think y'all hit it pretty well. I mean, I don't want to underplay what Kipp brought up from the beginning with Tate Ratledge and Jared Wilson. Like, to his point, I don't think any of us are surprised that Jared Wilson tested well. I was probably surprised that he and Tate Ratledge got the 2 highest athleticism scores of anyone in the combine. Like, that was very eye-opening to me. To Kipp's point, it does make people probably ask some questions like, why did you not get the full version of the offensive line this year? Or whether it's disappointing that they were playing through injuries or they just weren't getting everything that they needed out of them. It does make you kind of be like, man, how is it possible? But really impressive from those two guys. Just, again, I don't want to understate how crazy it is that they dominated the combine the way they did. Again, Jared, I was expecting him to have a really good day. Tate to do that surprised me a little bit. I wasn't necessarily expecting him to grade out as high as he did and everything that he did. And then Jordan, you mentioned something that I was going to mention. Like I think for Malachi, it's not going to blow you away with his 4.5 40, but it solidifies him in that first round stock conversation. Like I think that he's someone, like you mentioned, on-field drills, hitting the highest GPS number out of all of the defensive backs in 5 or 6 different drills. Tells you how fast he plays. And that 4.5 was really just a validation of saying, like, all right, he's fast enough. We don't have to worry about, not every big safety needs to be running a 4.3. And so I think that he really solidified that. And I'm with you. I think that Malachi Starks is going to be a great pro.
If you haven't seen this on Twitter with Tate Ratledge, go look at Chandler's Twitter, who put Tate Ratledge's 40, where he got his mullet, flapping in the wind, and put Freebird over it, because I mean that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen put with the combine. And before long, guys, we're going to be really previewing this NFL draft. I think that these Georgia guys did themselves a big favor with how well they performed. And then, we'll be talking next week about Pro Day and seeing what those guys do, especially guys like Jalen Walker, Michael Williams, really trying, and Dan Jackson as well, trying to make the most of the Pro Day. All right, I think this might be the earliest we've done our UGA men's basketball minute, but my goodness, what a time to do it. A huge week for Georgia basketball. They started off on Tuesday with an 88-83 win over then number 3 Florida. First time they had beaten Florida since 2019. First time they had beaten a top 3 opponent since beating number 3 Georgia Tech in January 2004. So 21 years. And then they follow that up and beat Texas on the road 83-67. Huge week. Can't really trying to just put into perspective how big that was for Georgia basketball. They came into last week, I think, pretty firmly off the bubble, needed a lot of help and needed to do a lot in a short amount of time to get themselves back in position. And they did it in a huge way with 2 wins in a week where I really thought if they go 1-1, they're still in the hunt. That would be considered a success. But they win both games. They beat a Florida team that was still in the hunt for the SEC regular season title. And now, guys, it sure looks like, as long as they take care of business this week, that Georgia has put itself in position to make the NCAA tournament for the first time in 10 years. Ben, as a resident Georgia basketball fan, someone who's followed it for quite a while, what did you make of this last week and just where the Bulldogs find themselves going into the last week of the regular season?
I mean, I cannot believe that the week unfolded the way that it did. I mean, to that first half against Florida, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a better half of basketball that Georgia played. When you consider the opponent, when you consider how badly you really needed it. Like, to your point, yeah, if Georgia splits and they lose to Florida and the same thing happens at Texas, it's like they're still in the mix. They could get in it. It's like the Florida game changed everything in terms of how you view this team. I mean, it gave Georgia has 3 of the more legitimate wins in the country right now. Like, they beat Florida, they beat St. John's in a neutral site, and then they beat Kentucky by double digits. Like, those right now are looking, and I know Kentucky hasn't been playing, as great of late, but I mean, there aren't many bubble teams that have that caliber of win. You look at their losses. I mean, they're not losing to any teams that aren't in the hunt for the NCAA tournament. Most of their losses are coming from teams that are on the top seeded lines of the NCAA tournament right now. And so to beat Florida, I think just changed the entire outlook. And it's weird to say that one game can do that. But like when you beat a team as good as Florida is, that might be a 1 seed, might be a 2 seed, could win the SEC tournament. Like, they're the type of team that if they make a run in March, I don't think anybody's going to be surprised if Florida's that type of team making the run. And I think that just legitimized Georgia's entire body of work. Like, I know we've gotten caught up sometimes in the Arkansas loss, I think stings. The Mississippi State, the way that one unfolded late, I think that one stings. But when you the reason it started to sting more and more is because you just look ahead and where are you going to get that signature win from? Like, where are you going to get that thing that changes the way that everyone views you? And that's what the Florida game ended up being. And I really never expected the Florida game to be a realistic possibility. Like, I thought matchup wise, that was maybe one of Georgia's worst in conference. And so the fact that that played out the way that it did, and I'll say this, there's been a lot on the Junkyard this year about Mike White coaching, right? Like, whenever Georgia loses, it's coach, you can't, like, oh, coaching cost us this one, and oh, we need to move on, whatever. At a certain point, can we look and be like, I mean, I don't know what everyone defines as coaching, but to me, when Georgia is playing great in the first half every single week, like, that's pretty good coaching. I realize everyone wants to finish strong every single week, which they did. Sort of, I guess you could count the Florida game as finishing strong. It got dicey there for a second. Let's put it that way. But Texas, they finished that one strong when Texas was trying to inch their way in. Never really let it get close enough to even be considered as a possibility. Like, but the way Georgia's played in first halves against, even in losses, and I know that when you lose, nobody can view it this way, but against Florida, against Texas, against Missouri, against in wins Oklahoma and Kentucky, against Arkansas on the road. Like, these are games. Tennessee, they're winning at halftime on the road. It's like, these are games that most teams are not winning at halftime. And I realize it sounds like loser talk, but it's not. Like, losing the game sucks. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but when you can find the wins against St. John's and Kentucky and Florida, it's like it is okay to sit there and justify and say, man, Mike White is doing some great things to put Georgia in position to win some basketball games against really good teams. And I know losing is frustrating. Nobody wants to lose, but it's really hard in this league this year. And the more, as we've gotten closer to Selection Sunday, the more I've felt like the committee might be viewing the SEC a little bit more favorably than some of these bracketologists. Like, and I think the bracketologists are starting to come around. Like, I'm seeing Georgia on the 10 line in some places, and the conversation around them potentially getting up to the 8 or 9 line, depending on how they finish the year, how they play in the SEC tournament. And that's crazy to think, just given how we were talking about them just a couple of weeks ago. But there's part of me that really thinks, like, this is arguably the best conference in the history of college basketball. And I think that the committee is going to respect that come tournament time. I mean, obviously the St. John's win, I think, is going to hold up really strongly for Georgia. I was looking at this weekend, and this is where you get down the rabbit hole of, like, what are all these other teams' resumes actually look like? Georgia goes on the road and beats Georgia Tech, and everyone rolls their eyes when I say go on the road to beat Georgia Tech because it's an hour away. But they went and played a game away from their home court against Georgia Tech. They win. That same Georgia Tech team is beating Clemson and Louisville in ACC plays. Those teams are second and third in the ACC right now. Like, I think when it comes down to it, the SEC is going to get a lot of favoritism from this committee. And I know they already were, even from bracketology folks, getting a lot of teams in the bracket, but it would not surprise me if really all these SEC bubble teams are much more in consideration, or even safer, I guess I should say, than they've thought at times throughout the year.
Yeah, I mean, there are 14 teams that I think legitimately could make the tournament, and it's just going to be fascinating to see how many get in. Right now, I'm projecting 12. That's my prediction, with Texas and Oklahoma being left out along with LSU and South Carolina, but maybe they both get in. And the thing that Ben hit on with this team, I mean, what do you say is their worst loss? I mean, I really would. I don't think I'd say at Arkansas because that's on the road. So are we talking about Mississippi State at home? Like, you don't have bad losses, and that's just going to be huge. You know, no matter what happens over this next week, you've put yourself in a great position just because of the resume that you've accrued.
It's a great point on the worst loss because, like, I don't think of either. In the moment, I didn't think of either of them as bad losses. It's just when you combine all of them and you can't find that one big win. But Florida, that's my point. It's like Florida changed all of that.
And I didn't see that coming. I had Florida winning that one by 10. And, you know, I want to shout out Mike White, as Ben talked about. He was named Dick Vitale Coach of the Week because of the success Georgia had last week. Silas Demery Jr., SEC Player of the Week, the first Georgia Player of the Week since Braylon Bridges, December 2022, after a big week when they played Notre Dame. Silas averaged 23.5 points. Him coming on as a scorer has been tremendous for this team, and it's a big reason why this offense has finally gotten into a rhythm consistently, and it's why we are feeling pretty good about them making the tournament. Kipp, what do you think about where Georgia is right now, and just what they've done to put themselves in a legitimate position to make the postseason?
Well, credit to them for ending that 4-game losing streak. Now they have a streak of their own, which is just kind of crazy. We never really expected them to be on a 2-game win streak coming in. We talked about these 2 games as kind of, if you just make one of the other ones and win both of these, but at the same time, they're catching South Carolina and Vanderbilt when they're playing their best basketball too. I mean, South Carolina just beat Texas and Arkansas at home. They're about to host Georgia. So I think you look at Colin Murray Boyles, that guy is a beast. He had 35 against Arkansas. And so I think that's an outstanding matchup for Ace and Newell. Those guys are going to be crashing the boards like crazy. But again, you're playing a South Carolina team that has the same win Georgia's got right now as far as just beating Texas. And I think that Silas Emery, he's averaging over 20 the last 5-6 games. He's got to stay hot. And then that Vanderbilt team, at the same time, you look at the way they're playing right now. They have their wins as of late against Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Missouri. So I just think that they're catching both of these teams. They might not be the top tier in the conference, but they are catching them when they're playing, their best basketball. So I think right now, I do think they're a 10 seed, but they have to hold serve and beat the teams that they're supposed to beat, because I would say that, losing on the road might not be as bad, but you don't want to get yourself a quad 2 loss, going into trying to get seeding and trying to get into the tournament. Go ahead and, leave no doubt and win 2 games you're supposed to win. That way you go into the SEC tournament play knowing, okay, guys, we earned it during the regular season. I think that's big for this team.
Yeah, they've got 2 quad 2 games left. It starts Tuesday at South Carolina, 6 p.m. Eastern time. That will be on SEC Network. I will be over there in Columbia, so that'll be a fun one to cover on the road. And then Saturday, they host Vanderbilt, 12 p.m. To close out the regular season. And we're talking about the SEC tournament next week in Nashville. All right, well, switching sports over to Georgia baseball. Georgia baseball continues to have a great start to the season. Now 13-1 on the season, took care of Florida Gulf Coast last week and got the series sweep. Bringing back on Olivia Sayer to talk about what Georgia baseball accomplished in these last few games as they continue to roll through non-conference play.
Hey everyone, I hope that you are all doing well. It's been a little while, so I figured I'd come on and chat a little bit about Georgia's weekend against Florida Gulf Coast. The Bulldogs went 5-0 if you include their midweek win over Georgia State. Walked off all 4 games against Florida Gulf Coast, including 1 in 7 innings, but there was a lot to take away from the series, a lot to take away from the week, and I'm excited to talk about it. So I think the most obvious point of discussion from just this past week in general is Georgia's starting pitching. And to be blunt, to be frank, it has not been good, and it was even further highlighted this past weekend. You look, Georgia starters only threw 8.2 innings combined between the 5 games. And part of that can be attributed, you look, Charlie Goldstein's on a pitch count, JT Quinn's on a pitch count, but the 2 of them actually tied with Leighton Finley for the longest outings with 2 innings each. So definitely not ideal, which in my mind is kind of crazy just looking at how elite this bullpen has been this year. It's strange that the starting pitching can't get there too, but I did some math after Georgia's Saturday doubleheader, which they swept against Florida Gulf Coast, and after that game, I have it pulled up right here, Georgia starters are lasting an average of less than 2 innings per game, as all of their starters have only thrown 21 innings through 13 games. And like I mentioned, part of that can be attributed to guys on a pitch count, but if you take all of them out of it, so taking Charlie Goldstein out of it, Colton Smith, and JT Quinn, that number is just down to 19.1 innings through 8 starts. So to reiterate, Georgia's starters that are not on a pitch count have only thrown 19.1 total innings through 8 starts, which is insane. Also, please bear with me, my voice sounds a little off because I'm currently getting over I don't even know what at the moment, but to play devil's advocate a little bit, you look at Georgia's starting rotation, and I do believe it's eventually going to work itself out. Charlie Goldstein, if he can stay healthy, that is going to be a massive boost for this rotation. He's just a savvy vet, a graduate, has experience in this league, was Georgia's ace the past couple of seasons when he was healthy, can be that Friday night starter. Then you look at Colton Smith, he's eventually going to come back not on a pitch count, and that could be huge once conference play begins. Leighton Finley, in my mind, is definitely going to figure it out, just had a really off night with his slider. So aside from Goldstein, Finley, and Smith, the guys that are going to be those Thursday through Saturday, those Friday through Sunday starters once conference play begins, somebody's going to have to step up, and whether that's a Zach Brown, who's looked a lot more confident since that UNCW start, maybe a Zach Harris, who's been Georgia's midweek guy. You look if JT Quinn can come back. He had a lot of good signs against Florida Gulf Coast. Maybe an Alton Davis, maybe a Brian Zeldin, but I personally like them both a lot better in the bullpen. Somebody's going to have to step up as that fourth and that fifth starter. So switching over to the offensive side, looking at Georgia's bats, I would honestly say great job to them this past weekend because they were put in some very tough situations. You look, Georgia trailed in 3 of its 4 games against Florida Gulf Coast, got down early against Georgia State, and it wasn't like it was just 1 run every now and then. It was a pair of 3-run deficits, a 5-run deficit, a 6-run deficit, which obviously needs to be fixed before SEC play begins because that's probably not going to fly. But the thing that impressed me the most about Georgia's hitters is, for the most part, maybe not so much in Sunday's series finale, but overall, they did a really good job at staying within their approach. They didn't try to expand their strike zone at the plate, didn't swing for the fences every time. Despite getting down early, you saw a lot of singles. They continued to take their walks, continued to take their hit-by pitches. And if this offense can be versatile, if it can continue to score in a variety of different ways, that's definitely going to be dangerous moving forward. Another thing that I want to point out about the offense is it's not like they were facing a bunch of high school pitchers. As Wes Johnson said, Florida Gulf Coast had some guys that could definitely start in the SEC, and Georgia State definitely threw some guys that could be their weekend starters. So Georgia was facing some pretty good arms out there, and that's one thing that Wes Johnson talked about after, I believe it was Sunday's series finale. He said that the thing about facing these mid-major teams is they're going to give you a lot of different looks on the mound. They're going to give you a lot of opportunities to just face live pitching that you may or may not see in the SEC. So that's definitely good for Georgia moving forward. But the Bulldogs have 2 games this week before starting a series against Columbia this weekend. It's Tuesday, I believe it's 3 p.m. against High Point, and then Wednesday they're playing Georgia State again, except for this time it'll be at Foley Field. And this weekend they'll start a series with Columbia, who was projected to do well in the Ivy League, did lose 35-1, I believe was the score against Oregon this past weekend, but should be a fun week of baseball for the Bulldogs.
Good stuff, as usual, from Olivia. Appreciate her popping on to talk Georgia baseball. We're going to take a quick break and then jump into our spring breakouts draft. All right, we are getting ready for the spring breakouts draft. To lay the groundwork for those who have not watched or listened to this before, or if you just need a refresher, we're going to pick 7 players apiece. Nobody's drafting a quarterback. You will take 1 running back, 1 wide receiver, 1 tight end, 1 offensive lineman, 2 members of the defensive front 7, and 1 defensive back. Now, these are breakout players. It's not every player on the roster. So if you listen to this whole episode and say, why didn't they pick Gunnar Stockton, or why didn't they pick whoever?
Well, because we're not taking quarterbacks, Jordan. That's why we didn't take Gunnar Stockton.
Well, yeah. But any other breakout guys, anyone who started last year for Georgia is not eligible. We kind of whittled down the roster a little bit. Any transfer to Georgia this offseason is eligible, which I think you will probably find that out pretty quickly. So we are going to get started. We did a random number generator before the draft started. Ben won out. So Ben has the first pick. Kipp has the second pick. And then I have the third pick, which means I have the first pick in the second round. And we will snake back and forth from there. So I'll turn it over to you, Ben. You got the first pick. Who are you going with?
I wanted the first pick. I don't know if you all feel the same way. I'm very curious for you all to give your input on whether you had a 1-1 or not when we get to them. I don't want you all to have to tip any picks or anything like that if you feel like you can get value on them or anything. But To me, this guy, I wanted him. I won the draw that we did beforehand, and I very much wanted to be the very first pick. I'm going with Chris Cole. I love this guy. I think that Georgia is going to need this guy to step up in a big way. I mean, Georgia's losing at linebacker Jalen Walker, losing Smile Munden. There's going to be reps to go around. Yes, CJ Allen has been around. Yes, Raylan Wilson has been around, but there are going to be reps to go around at linebacker. I think that he has a pass rushing skill set that Georgia is going to have to lean on, just given where the outside linebacker position is right now from a depth standpoint. And so to me, Chris Cole, versatility factor, I think the world of this guy as a player. I think that his upside is through the roof. For anybody that was listening to one of our recruiting shows recently with Andrew Ivins, he was gushing about Chris Cole as well. So it might not be that hugely of a surprise that I was taking him with the first pick. But for me, when I went through the full list that you sent over to us, Jordan, I was like, if I can only have one guy on this list, I want it to be Chris Cole. And so when I got the first overall pick, had to be Chris Cole.
It wasn't the story I put out on Monday, talking to Chris. That
That's
wasn't. Yeah, go ahead and plug that there. All right, Chris Cole is the first off the board there to Ben. All right, Kipp, you are up. Who are you going with the second overall pick?
I will say that I love that pick just because I don't know if there's a guy that probably fans in general are more excited to see on the field than Chris Cole, just because he just has that intoxicating skill set of being a guy that could do a number of roles. Maybe not specifically like the Jalen Walker role, but more like a guy like Roquan Smith, or just a guy that, has that ability to cover, but also come downhill. So I do love that pick just because of his unique skill set. I always go on a, what position lacks depth. I need to lock in a guy that I expect big things from this spring. So with that in mind, I'm taking Chauncey Bowens. Because he might not be the most talented guy that we have to choose from here. And I don't mean that as a slight to him. That's Georgia. They just stack elite talent from top to bottom. But if there's one thing Georgia needs to put an emphasis on this spring is figuring out how to run the damn ball. Because what we saw last season was an abomination to the Georgia program and what they should be able to do every single season. I mean, they should never be outside the top 100 in rushing yards. They should never be one of the worst rushing teams in the country, but they were last year. And regardless of the health of the offensive line, they got to make sure that they have the backs in place to be able to get the ground game back. And so I think that makes Chauncey Bowens the guy to watch, because you got Nate Frazier coming back. Sure. Feature back, has the ability to make dynamic plays. But Bowens is the guy I think set up for not just a breakout spring, but a breakout season. I just think, he started impressing the people in the building in Athens toward the end of last season. And then he got the injury bug as well, missed some practice. So I do think that that he has what it takes to be a workhorse back. And he's got some juice too. He's got some playmaking ability. And so I think, he's had a chance to practice against this defense. And I think he's going to be a guy that comes into spring with increased confidence. He knows he can make plays against these guys. He knows that he belongs in the SEC. So I just think, given that offseason to go ahead and know what you can do, know what you bring to the table, and also just know that there's an opportunity for you to get a lot of playing time this spring. I just think that Chauncey's going to take that and run with it.
Big thing for Chauncey, this will be his second spring. You look at Nate Frazier and Dwight Phillips Jr., they were not around for spring ball last year, so that could be a huge asset for him. Be very interested to see what Chauncey does. All right, I'm feeling pretty good getting the turn right here, boys. I was really worried that one of my top guys would be gone, but my board's actually looking pretty good going at the turn. So the final pick of the first round for me, I'm going with Zachariah Branch, the USC transfer. Heard really good things about how he hit the ground running this offseason. I think he's got an opportunity to be Georgia's leading receiver come the fall. So I think you can't go wrong with picking transfers when it comes to spring practice. I think about 2 springs ago, one of the guys we heard a ton about was Dom Lovett, and people just could not get over how well he had done adjusting, The biggest thing for these wide receivers is learning the playbook. Dom Lovett did such a great job doing that. It took Ra Thomas a little bit of time to kind of get caught up. But I really like what I've heard behind the scenes about Zachariah Branch. His skill set, his yard after catch ability. I'm going to be watching Zachariah Branch really closely, and he's going to be my first pick. All right, the second round, I should say, the first pick of the second round. This is kind of going more toward what Kipp was just talking about when he picked Chauncey Bowens. You're kind of looking at the options, and there's a few positions, especially with some of the guys we have removed from the field that we can draft. One position I think is super weak as far as options is tight end. And so I'm going to go ahead and get one and get Elias Williams. I think he just immediately caught everybody's attention during the Sugar Bowl practices. I mean, just how big he is, how physical he is. I really don't think you can go wrong with either him or Ethan Barbour. But Elias, I think, has a chance to be really special. It's one of those things, too. I think when you look at spring practice drafts like this, as compared to when we do the same thing in fall camp, I think when we do it in fall camp, you're kind of looking more towards these guys are really going to contribute this season. These are guys who are going to be a factor. It's going to be hard for a guy like Elias or really Ethan either to be big-time contributors come the season because you have Oscar Delp, because you have Lawson Lucky. But at the same time, you look at spring practice, it's a chance to flash. It's a chance to show your potential. So I'm not saying Elias Williams is going to earn a ton of playing time. Throw Jaden Riddell in there as well, a guy that's got a year on him at UGA. But I think he's a guy that's going to make noise. So Elias Williams is my second pick. All right, Kipp. All right, Kipp, you are up with the second pick in the second round. Who are you going with?
I'm going with Noah Thomas. A guy that brings a big play wide out to the offense, a guy that is a touchdown machine. And I just think that he's going to be a big problem. You look at 6'6", 6'5", that kind of frame just changes how other teams have to defend you. And I think this spring, we expect Colby Young to be a part of Georgia's team this offseason, but, we're still waiting for that to be made official. So going into the spring, I'm thinking Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi, these quarterbacks are going to want to get chemistry with these big time, outside wideouts. And I just think that he is going to be a guy that just gives them a major target. The reason why they went, after him in the transfer portal is because of all the tools he brings to the table. You got that frame, you got that body control. I think going into G-Day, you have to imagine that the first place is going to be a tunnel screen to him just because we all want to see it. I mean, the fact that he can make plays like that in such a big frame. Dylan Bell is going to be moved all over the offense, but now, he's not going to get asked to play a position that, he's not naturally just built to play. But we know the skill set Noah Thomas brings. It's a defined, asset. And I just think that, especially when you start getting into a spring game atmosphere, I think he's the kind of guy that can just get a lot of oohs and ahs with, plays over the top, and especially in the red zone. So I think it's big for him to get that chemistry early and often because they're going to expect him to maybe push for double-digit touchdowns during the season. So this spring's going to be big for him to make a lot of noise and showcase why they went and got him in the portal.
Noah Thomas, the leading receiver at Texas A&M last year, expected to do big things, and he will be someone to watch once spring practice gets underway. All right, Ben, you got back-to-back picks. Let's take them one at a time. What is who are you going with your first pick to end the second round?
Well, for starters, remind me when we do our poll, because I know part of this is not just us picking what we believe, it's us trying to, win votes sometimes. Do we do this poll before the spring, or do we do it after the spring, or do we do both?
I kind of think we do both. I think I'm pretty sure we will do a poll once this is out. And Usually I think what we do, we revisit it after spring. And it's more of, all right, the first time, once the team is out there, the people get to vote on it. after spring, we kind of circle back and say, all right, who do we really think won?
All right, so I might be
so I would say it's front loaded to right now as far as trying to get votes.
Well, I might be sacrificing a little bit of a vote here because I think that there might be other people even at his position, and we haven't taken anybody at this position yet, that might get more pre-spring favoritism from the fan base. This is a guy that I feel very strongly about. I loved him as a high school prospect. I think that he is going to be a great college football player and a great NFL player someday as well. Someone that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough, and I probably could have got him 4 rounds from now, but this is how strongly I feel about him. I'm going to take DeMello Jones at defensive back. I love this guy. I think this guy is just, you hear it's like cliche all the time, like, oh, he's just a football player. It's like, that is DeMello Jones. Like Swainsboro, Georgia, 1A football, playing for state championships, playing offense, playing defense, playing special teams, single-handedly doing everything for his team to be able to win football games. Like that is DeMello Jones. And I think that I'll just say it just because I know one of y'all will probably end up taking him anyways. And so I'm not trying to, mention a name of someone that you'll end up picking, but there's been a lot of buzz around Ellis Robinson. Fairly, he is going to be a great football player as well. It's not so much me picking one versus the other. It's that I understand there are going to be more votes for Ellis Robinson at this point in time. And I get that. And I'm sacrificing that. This is me advocating for a football player that I very, very strongly believe in. And that's why I'm taking DeMello Jones.
I do want to say before you make your next pick, it's also when we get to the conversation after spring, the expectation for Ellis Robinson to hit and be, oh, this spring breakout worked out would be him starting. DeMello Jones is more of just getting buzz and people talking about him. So like I understand the pick, really more so just on that. I mean, anything less than Ellis Robinson with the first team defense at G-Day is going to be like, man, well, what happened there? DeMello Jones, who to back up Ben's pick, I thought he got a lot of buzz toward the end of the year. You heard Kirby bring up his name a few times just with the progress he's made. So I don't think it's a crazy pick, Ben. I don't even think it's when you really got to defend all that hard. I see the vision there. I like the pick.
I feel strongly about the pick. I also realized that if this was NFL draft and we had a bunch of people giving their opinions on it, they would be saying I just overdrafted DeMello Jones, and that's totally fine. They'll find out after the fact that I didn't overdraft DeMello Jones. I'm cool with that.
All right, we are starting the next round. Ben, you've got the first pick. Who are you going with?
I'm taking another guy earlier than I expected to, and a guy that there are a bunch of guys in his position group that I really, really like, but I think I'm just going to shore up my defensive side of the ball, and then I'll figure out offense afterwards. I'm taking my first freshman. I'm going with Elijah Griffin, and I know that is great. There's a lot of guys. I'm looking at the list that you sent us, Jordan, right now, and there are 6 names on that list that I would probably feel comfortable taking here, and that a lot of people could justifiably take over Elijah Griffin. I just think 5-star elite defensive lineman. He's really strong in the weight room. I think there's going to be a lot of buzz about him. This is maybe me zigging from my last pick by taking a guy that I think there's going to be a lot of fan base pre-spring hype buzz about. So I might be trying to steal back some of the votes that I might have lost by making a savvy pick with DeMello Jones. I think that Elijah Griffin is going to have a great spring, and he and a couple of other young guys on the defensive side of the ball, I think there's going to be no choice but for them to be first-year impact guys just because of the nature of Georgia's depth chart right now at that position.
The beauty of getting a pick when the rounds flip, getting those back-to-back picks is if you make a pick that you're sort of like, well, you clean it up right there. And I'll be completely honest, Ben, when you set up the DeMello Jones pick, what you were saying, I went, oh, he's taking Elijah Griffin. Just with how you were saying how much you love this guy coming out of high school, I was like, oh, this is Elijah Griffin. So I really like that pick. He was very high among my front 7 options. I think Elijah Griffin is going to make noise at a position where we talk about interior defensive line. Guys, I think it's kind of wide open. They need some guys to step up, like Ben said. I think Elijah Griffin is a great pick there. All right, Kipp, you are up next. Who are you going with?
If you have to begin your pick by defending it,
I'm not defending it. I'm not
and then mentioning another player to try to just plant that seed.
I'm letting people know to maybe reconsider the way that they're thinking about it. Okay.
It's a red flag. it's a red flag for me because I already knew I was going to take Ellis Robinson when at my next pick, and I had to sit here as silently as I can be, which usually is not silent at all, and let this, complete erasure of Ellis Robinson maybe just earning playing time this spring to occur. But at the same time, going into the spring, these aren't two guys that may be projected as starters. You do have to remember that Georgia is bringing back not just Dalen Everett, but also Daniel Harris, a guy that did play a lot for Georgia last spring. So it's still roles that'll have to be earned by either of these guys. But I am taking Ellis Robinson because I think, all last year it was like, why isn't he on the field? Why isn't he getting more snaps? Why did he only end up with like 50 snaps? And it was, he needed to get bigger and stronger. So what does he have the opportunity to do this offseason? Well, you have to think that maybe Scott Sinclair spent some time with him. They've made it a focal point for him to, put some muscle on, get more physical. I think year 2 for Ellis Robinson is where he's a lot more active. He's part of not just the rotation, but, he has a chance to break through. And, I think that Ben and I both made the right choice as far as taking cornerbacks because even though Georgia went to the transfer portal to get 3 safeties or 3 DBs that could play, at safety or star, I just have a hard time seeing Aguero, Ja'Cory Thomas, and obviously KJ Bolden. I think those guys are going to be the guys that are, earn starting roles. They're just basically giving themselves a safety net and making sure they have competition. Ellis Robinson is a guy that I think, even Kirby Smart he's looking ahead to 2026, and he's like, I got to do everything I can to make sure Ellis Robinson, DeMello Jones, and unless he just balls out, Daniel Harris are at cornerback for this team next year. Like that's got to be high in his priority list. And I think that, both the guys taken, but I think Ellis is going to be given every opportunity to earn a huge role in this defense, even if it's putting Dalen Everett at star at times, because I think that's something they'll probably look at this spring, because I do think he's got the physicality and they like different roles for the star, sometimes, coverage roles. So I just think that they're going to unleash Ellis Robinson this spring and see what he can do and see what this time in the strength and conditioning program has done for him. And so I'm interested to see it. I think that he's got an opportunity to not just break out, but just have everyone still going back and wondering why didn't he get on the field more last year. So I do like that pick, and I think it's going to be a huge spring for him.
Well, Kipp, let me be the first to say I think that's a great pick.
I was going to say, Kipp, are you really going to argue with the guy that I bet Ben's defending the Luka trade for the Mavericks? I mean, do you really want to get an argument with this guy?
You know what? You might be right about that. I might need to have a little bit of introspection here after the show.
Kipp, I did want to say that one of my predictions is that Ellis is going to win that cornerback job over Daniel Harris. There's a lot of intrigue. It goes back to last year. A lot of people thought he had a chance to start as a true freshman. The expectations are high, as we kind of talked about with the DeMello Jones pick, but I like Ellis a lot. I think he is going to be a factor for this team. All right, we're going to close out the third round. I've got back-to-back picks. My first one, I'm going to go with Quintavious Johnson. He's a guy that I was really excited about over the course of his freshman year, a guy that, I didn't really think, guys, he was going to get on the field a ton. He was a guy that gets brought up every time his name comes up. Someone goes, hey, did y'all know that he played quarterback when he was in high school? I don't know if either of you guys have heard that one.
Also a long snapper, which I think may be even more impressive.
Oh, I would totally agree. And I did not know that. So that will be, I'll put that in my back pocket. But he's a guy that they trusted out there on special teams. That got in the mix a little bit. A guy that just physically looked impressive. I mean, I'm thinking about after the Sugar Bowl, just kind of walking around and talking to guys after the game and just seeing him up close. I mean, that is a big dude. And you look at that outside linebacker position, they lose Chaz Chambliss, they lose Damon Wilson to the transfer portal, and that job is wide open. I mean, I think that is one where a guy like Quintavious Johnson can go in there and win it and be a starter. Now, competition is going to be fierce. They bring in 3 edge rushers in this latest signing class, and still going to be really interested in what they do with Gabe Harris, if they want him playing outside, if they want him at defensive end. But I'm really high on Quintavious Johnson. I think he's a guy that is going to get talked about during the spring. And I think he's got a legitimate chance to be starting by the time we are looking at G-Day and talking about the spring game on April 12th. All right, we are going to the 4th round. My first pick, so that was a pick for the defense. I'm going back to the offense, and I want to be perfectly honest. I'm kind of surprised this guy is still on the board to start the 4th round. I'm going with Daniel Calhoun. Georgia, as I mentioned back when we were talking about the NFL Combine, they lost 4 starters to the NFL. You're looking at both of your guards that moved on, Dylan Fairchild and Tate Ratledge. I think it's a safe bet that Micah Morris is going to be one of the starting guards, but that other job is completely open. And there's a few guys that can get in the mix. I think about Michael Uni, Marquise Easley, but I think Daniel Calhoun's the favorite. I think he's a guy that was really thought highly of when he signed out of Walton High School, a guy that didn't play a ton last year, but you just look at the experience Georgia had on the offensive line in 2024. My projection is Daniel Calhoun is your starting right guard this year, a guy that probably in time could play tackle, but I think you look at him as an option. You look at him getting that year under his belt last year. I always try to pump the brakes when we talk about first-year SEC offensive linemen, just because what they're being asked to do is just incredible. But you go into your second year, you go through a whole offseason of workouts and getting ready. I'm really high on Daniel Calhoun. I think he's going to be a starter. I think he's going to be a guy we talk a lot about this spring. All right, Kipp, you are up with your 4th pick. Where are you going?
Man, I thought long and hard about Calhoun as well, but I also think this spring, I think Georgia is going to take a long look at, who are the best 5? Like, who are the best 5 offensive linemen we can put, on the field at one time? And I think with that in mind, I think they're going to take a long look at Ernest Green at guard. And so I like Micah Morris the start at one spot, but if you start looking at Green at guard and Micah Morris at right guard, and then it's like, okay, who are your tackles? Well, that's because I think this is the spring for Bo Hughley, and that's why he's my pick. I think that he's over 300 pounds now. So he's put on 35 pounds of good weight. He's coming off that shoulder surgery that caused him to lose weight, but he's recovered. And I think he's going to be in the mix for snaps this season. And I think with his athleticism, his overall talent, this is just such a huge spring for him. And I think he's got an opportunity to show them that you should take a look at Ernest Green at guard, even though, I know the guy would probably prefer to play tackle. But if it comes down to putting the best 5 on the field, I think Bo's going to make a case for him to be one of those 5, and maybe they move some guys around. So I just think this is, just a big spring for him. I think he's going to take advantage of it. He's kind of been, behind some guys. You got Monroe Freeling in there. He's kind of locked in. Ernest Green, the injury kind of opened things up for Monroe to take some snaps as well. But now I just think that you see that opportunity for playing time. You're finally healthy. You got a lot of just overall raw physical talent. Bo's going to give Stacey Searles just, maybe some hard decisions to make as far as who his 5 guys are. So I like Bo to have a breakout spring.
I really like that Bo Hughley pick. I wrote about Ernest Green on Tuesday talking about the offensive line, where to me, he is sort of the guy to watch on the offensive line. Do they leave him at left tackle, or as like Kipp said, do they decide to kick him inside? I think Bo Hughley is sort of going to play that role of the swing tackle, where if they have a guy go down at either tackle spot, it's Bo Hughley, no matter if it's on the left or the right. So I like that pick quite a bit. All right, Ben, give us your 4th pick. And then after you give that pick, I'm just going to do a quick rundown of what each of us still need. So give us your 4th pick.
Well, I think you all kind of just made my picks for me because I wasn't sure what position groups I was going to go to. And now you both have a receiver and an offensive lineman. I don't have either. So I'm just going to wait on those and figure it out because I still don't know which one I'm going to take at either of those spots. So I'm going to start with my 4th round pick. I'm going to go tight end. I'm going to go with Jaden Riddell. I think that he has – I hear what you're saying on Elias Williams. The ceiling is through the roof. I think that there's going to be a lot of buzz about him just because of his skill set. And quite frankly, Kipp's now basically has one option for him to be able to take it tight end. And I think very highly of Ethan Barbour as well. I think that there's not going to be many guys at Georgia that have better contested catch. Here I am now, Kipp. I'm over here defending your pick that you haven't even gotten the chance to make yet. I like it. I'm going to like it so much. But Ethan has great. I think he's going to be one of the better contested catch guys that Georgia has, despite being a quote-unquote undersized tight end. But Jaden Riddell has a year advantage over the top of 2 of those guys. This is another guy that Georgia has that looks like he was built in a lab already, and then he's now gotten a year with Scott Sinclair to build upon that. With Ben Urosic gone, you sort of wonder, okay, who's going to fill in that? Georgia loves to play 3 tight ends. They might even have the opportunity to play more than that this year, but who is most like Ben Urosic in what they're going to be asking them to do? And I think that's very likely Jaden Riddell, and I think he's going to be the one that sort of inserts himself as that 3rd tight end alongside Lawson Lucky and Oscar Doe.
I think a lot of people totally forgot about how excited they got about Jaden Riddell during those Orange Bowl practices. There's plenty of reason to be excited about Jaden as he goes into his 2nd year. All right, before we start the 5th round, I'm just going to go through the positions we still need. We'll look at everybody's teams once they are done, but Ben will have the next pick. He needs a running back, a wide receiver, and a member of the front 7. Kipp is
no. I need an offensive lineman.
An offensive lineman. My apologies.
Looking, rigged, folks, just remember that the draft Jordan runs is rigged.
Yes, exactly. A running back, a receiver, and offensive lineman. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. Kipp needs a tight end and then 2 members of the front 7. And then I need a running back, a member of the front 7, and a defensive back. All right, Ben, you are back up to start the 5th round. Who are you going with?
Well, I'm fast forwarding like 3 weeks from now, and I'm just imagining reading a Jordan Hill practice report that's telling me that he's heard something about Dwight Phillips busting off a 70-yard touchdown run in some practice. And again, I think Jordan, you mentioned when you were picking running back originally with Chauncey Bowens, like a lot of that just has to do with how many options we have available to us at that position group. And, I don't know enough about Micah Bell to pick him, and Dwight Phillips has a year advantage over Bo Walker. And I just think he's one of those guys people are going to get a little excited about. And I know that, Georgia had some weird packages that they used for him throughout the course of this year, and he got more touches than I would have expected him to get as a true freshman. Just given his stature, I was not expecting him to get that many touches, and I wasn't expecting him to actually be getting used in, red zone, goal line situations the way that he was. So I think Dwight is going to have a great spring, and I think that there are going to be some moments throughout the spring in particular where a scrimmage happens or a practice happens and enough people are on hand that some buzz gets around there. Like, ooh, Dwight had a really big play. Man, that guy's really, really fast. Like, I know anytime that I heard someone that had never been to a Georgia practice before go and see Arian Smith run, one of their biggest reactions, which I know he didn't run the way that maybe he would have liked to fully this past weekend, but everyone's always like, man, Arian Smith can scoot. And it's like, I think the same type of things are going to happen with Dwight Phillips when people see him in person.
All right, Kipp, who are you going with your next pick?
Well, there's still guys on the board, or at least one guy that's on the board that I think is going to start next season, and that's Xavier McLeoud. I think that, he played multiple positions last season, and it seemed like he really came on late in the year. I think, you have Warren Brinson coming on as well, but like as far as that interior defensive line, I think Xavier McLeod was giving them the best, snaps of the group. And so year 3, definitely prime for a breakout season, if not a breakout spring, because they need leadership in that room. I think, this offseason, he's the guy that can assert himself as a leader in that locker room. And I think that they're going to ask him to be a big piece of that puzzle, because you are losing Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, the guys that played a lot of football for Georgia. And again, Ty Ingram Dawkins, you're basically losing a starting defensive line. And so I think McLeod's going to play multiple positions. And you really liked what I saw from him late in the year. I think he's got a chance, really of all the defensive line coming back to be a difference maker because he got some consistent, disruptive plays late in the year. And he's just started to make them at a rate that kind of showed you like, okay, this guy, fits what Georgia defensive linemen have done during their really dominant years on defense.
Yeah, I really like Xavier McLeod. He was high on my board. He's a guy that I think is going to be a starter, and he was one of those guys last year. And I think he finally started getting the more of the playing time. But it was like when he was out there, he would flash, and you kind of went, maybe they need to get him more snaps. And I do think over the course of that year, they wound up doing that. All right, going to my pick. I've got back-to-back here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kind of get lost in the sauce trying to keep up with all these. So my next pick, I kind of went back and forth on who I wanted as part of the front seven, but I feel pretty good about this pick. It's a guy that came in as a really highly sought-after linebacker, a guy that was a freshman last year that kind of got overshadowed by someone else who's already been picked. But I think people need to make sure they don't forget about this guy. I think that he made contributions on special teams and is going to get in the mix over the course of spring practice. I'm talking about Justin Williams. I think that he was one of the top linebackers in his high school class for a reason. I think it was very easy to get caught up on what Chris Cole did, and Chris Cole deserves a lot of credit and a lot of attention. But every time Chris Cole got brought up, Kirby Smart was very quick to be like, Chris and Justin. He would bring up Justin Williams, make sure people did not forget that Justin Williams is right there. It's so hard to get a great feel for what these inside linebackers will be able to do with C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson, two more experienced guys ahead of them. But I'm still super high on Justin Williams. I'm picking him. I think he's going to make a lot of plays and get a lot of attention over the course of the spring.
I like that pick.
All right, next pick. It's my second to last pick. Going with defensive back. A little bit earlier in this episode, Kipp threw some names out of guys to get in the mix at star and at safety, but he did not say this name. And I think he's a name that you could very easily forget about, even those of us who cover the team. He's been a guy that's not really factored into the plans to this point, and it's Chris Pill. Chris is a guy that started off at cornerback. He's a guy that got a lot of buzz leading up to that Orange Bowl when all of a sudden Georgia kind of had that mass exodus, and it's like, who are we going to get to play corner in this game against Florida State? And Chris Pill did really well in those Orange Bowl practices. Hadn't really been in a factor, really besides that Orange Bowl. And I think that there's a real opportunity, guys, where we're talking about Chris Pill perhaps being one of the options at safety. And we talked about some of the guys they brought in, but I think Chris is a guy that's super athletic, a guy that, going back to his freshman year, missed time with, I want to say it was turf toe. He got hurt during that fall camp, and I think that kind of put him behind. But a guy like Chris Pill, I think he has stayed put because the coaches have a plan for him. I think Chris Pill is going to be a guy that gets in the mix for that starting safety job opposite of KJ Bolden, and I think he's a name to pay attention to. All right, Kipp, you are up next with your second to last pick. Who are you going with?
Well, I'm staying on the defensive line and getting a guy that it's kind of crazy that he's even one of the options because, based on his playing time, when he was healthy, he made a big impact, and that's Jordan Hall. He had over 200 snaps last season, but we wouldn't know it because he had stress fractures in each leg last summer that kind of took him out for the first half of the season. But he had surgery. He came on late at the end of the season and played in the bowl game, SC championship, made an impact in those games, and he's played in 2 bowl games and 2 SC championship games now. So he's got big game experience, and so I think that's really going to help him a lot. And just the fact that Georgia put out that workout video at Sanford Stadium, and I was like, holy crap, Jordan Hall is in great shape right now. Like he looks ready to make a big impact. And so don't forget the fact that he was a 5-star defensive lineman. He's 6'3.5", 310 pounds, and just looks like he is ready to really make just a big impact for Georgia's defense. So I think, again, somehow it's not the sexy pick. People want linebackers. People want pass rushers. Georgia's defense is built on the defensive line, and I think that he's going to be a starting defensive lineman for Georgia this year. So somehow at the end of this draft, I've been able to get, two of Georgia's three probably starting defensive linemen. So, I don't know. I feel kind of like Howie Roseman right now. It's like, how do I keep getting away with it? But here we are. So just remember that whenever you're trying to figure out where Georgia's pass rush is going to come from this spring, maybe not hearing a lot of buzz at edge, it's because the defensive line's wrecking things, and it's because of the guys I drafted.
I thought for sure that Kipp was going to say, and remember when you vote for this, who had the best team. So, but I guess that was just implied because of how great of a job Kipp has done. All right, Ben, we're going to close out the 6th round with your pick. Let us know who you're going with.
Well, I wanted on record when I was deciding with my 3rd round pick, I was trying to decide whether I was going to take Jordan Hall or Elijah Griffin, and I was torn on. Again, I think it sort of depends on how you interpret breaking out. It's like, I think that Kipp is spot on. If Georgia's defensive line is going to be good this year, Jordan Hall needs to take that next step and be that guy that breaks out. I think I was more going from the line of thinking of I think Elijah Griffin is going from a guy that wasn't on Georgia's roster to a guy that we are going to be firmly talking about as part of the defensive line rotation. And I think that his spring is going to be a reason for that. But I will say I was very torn between those two when I was making that pick at the time. Now I got to decide. I like a few of the offensive linemen. I like a few of the wide receivers. I really don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with receiver just because I can't figure out what I'm going to do on the offensive line yet. This is a guy that had a really strong offseason. Like when it came to offseason throwing sessions, he is built already like a college football player, despite being a freshman. I think that there might be some other freshmen that could have better, more statistical careers than he does. But I just think year one, as ready as he is, from the things that I've heard from offseason workouts up to this point, I'm taking CJ Wiley, which you could make a case to me for any of the freshman wide receivers right now, just based on some of the buzz that I've heard about them through some of this offseason workout stuff. Like, everyone talked about Talon Taylor, and I totally understand that one. Landon Roldan, I think is more college ready than a lot of people expect, but just the way that CJ Wiley is built now, the trouble that CJ is going to run into probably, Kipp takes Noah Thomas. I think there's going to be a lot of snap overlap there. Colby Young, I think there's going to be a lot of snap overlap there. So it might be challenging to break through at his position group, but that's just how I feel about the type of spring. And again, the buzz that I think that he's going to have this spring.
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong, I think, with any of these freshman receivers. Now, again, what that amounts to as far as playing time, we don't know. But again, when you focus solely on spring practice, seeing them make plays, hearing good things from Kirby Smart and Gunnar Stockton, that's enough. And I think CJ Wiley has a chance to impress. All right, we're going into the 7th and final round of our spring breakouts draft. Ben, you're up next. You need an offensive lineman. Who are you going with?
I will also, say I was trying to play the game. I thought Noah Thomas was going to end up dropping down to me earlier in the draft. So then when he didn't, it kind of it readjusted everything that I was going to do. So that was a misfire by me. But I don't know what to do on the offensive line right here, guys. I'm going to be honest with you. I'll say that since you guys already have your offensive line picks, I can talk through this and I can figure it out while right here. I like Michael Uni a lot. I think that there's a chance that he's very much one of those guys competing for tackle. As weird as it is, Malachi Tolliver is an interesting one just because there's not a lot of depth at safety or at center. And so he's probably going to be asked to do that, but I don't know where he's going to fit in compared to some of the freshmen like Cortez Smith. So that's probably scaring me away a little bit. Haven't heard a lot about Marquise Easley, but I just think he's someone that has a chance to take that next step. Jamal Merriweather too. I think he's been in one of these breakout drafts with us before, or maybe a fall breakout draft. And then Marcus Harrison, we went by him when he was at the golf course. We were at the golf course, Jordan. He was playing with Ryan Puglisi and
Lawson Lucky.
And it's like he just is he looks like Bigfoot out there. Like he is just massive compared to these other guys that are really good athletes.
Come on, are you telling me you're not just gonna pick the Peachtree Ridge guy?
And then I'd go through all this, just take Dennis Uzochukwu.
Kipp hit in the private chat who you should take, and I'll throw the name out there because I think he's right. Juan Gaston is just sitting there for you to take.
You know what? I'll do it. I'll take Juan Gaston. I was going down the list. He was the next one on the list. I was probably going to be deciding between Uni, Marcus Harrison, because I do think Marcus Harrison is going to surprise a lot of people this spring. And I think he'll be getting a lot more tackle reps than people are expecting him to. But I am with you. I think Juan Gaston has a chance. He cuts a little bit of weight here this spring. He's freakishly athletic at his size. I think my hesitation there is he's not someone that I'm necessarily expecting to be competing for day one snaps at the beginning of the year, but that doesn't matter. You guys are right. I need to take your judgment. I've probably gone away from where you all are thinking enough time throughout the draft that I need to go to where y'all are thinking. So I'm taking Juan Gaston.
Ben loves to zig while we're all zagging, and that's what makes him so good at this. And maybe when we look at the votes after the fact, we're like, we need to start listening to Ben going forward.
We'll see. I don't know. I like where y'all's drafts are at compared to mine right now. I'll put it that way.
All right, we are in the middle of the 7th round. Kipp, you need a tight end. Who are you going with, and let us know what you think of.
I'm going to think about this long and hard, but I will begin by saying I think Juan Gaston's going to he's going to break the mold as far as I think he's physically ready to roll.
Yeah.
And a lot of people make a lot about his 375 pounds. The spring heat will take care of that. But he's 6'7", 370 pounds. I think, the offseason, he's probably scared some of the defensive linemen just with just how physically ready he is for a true freshman. So I think once the pads come on, we're going to learn a lot about him. But I think he's ready to really open some eyes. So, you know what, Ben? I love that pick. And
it was your pick, so you picked it for me.
Well, and you guys made my pick for me as well. But, I love Ethan Barbour. I think that you mentioned the freshman wide receivers, TJ Wiley, Talon Taylor. But as much as those guys have come up and Landon Roldan, I think Ethan's the one that's gotten the most buzz out of all the pass catchers because you just can't cover this guy. All right. And his competitive nature on those 50-50 balls is going to be something that really shows out in this spring setting. So the fact that he has great hands, the fact that Georgia desperately needs someone with great hands, it's set up for him to really showcase himself. And the tight end room, no offense to Pro Football Focus, they didn't have a top 10 returning tight end, but they do have the best tight end room in the country. So starting snaps are going to be earned. But at the same time, I just think that Ethan Barbour is coming in and just lighting it up, just like he did in high school. And I don't think that's going to stop this spring. So, keep him off the field at your own peril. I think he's going to make you want to play him as much as possible.
As competitive of a dude as you're going to find as well, which I think is going to earn him a lot more opportunities.
I really don't think you could have gone wrong with either of the freshman tight end that are on this team, and I think Ethan Barbour is gonna be a guy we hear about over the course of spring practice. I have the last pick. I need a running back. I'm going with Bo Walker, the only running back that Georgia signed in the 2025 cycle, although they tried very hard to sign some other guys. I think the fact they stuck with Bo, over the course of a very odd senior season as he was looking for eligibility, I think he's a really talented guy. Now he comes into a position room that has some experience ahead of him. But the thing to me, really, with any of these young running backs, we have no idea what Branson Robinson is going to be able to do. We have no idea what Roderick Robinson is going to be able to do. My thing with Dwight Phillips Jr., I still want to see if he can stay healthy and if he can take the hits. Think about the SEC title game. He took a big hit, wound up leaving that game. I like some of these guys we don't know quite as much about in the running back room. I'll be excited to hear about Bo Walker, see how he fits in, and see if he can hang with a room that has some questions, but no doubt is still packed with talent going into 2025. All right, that's going to end the draft. I'm going to go through each of our teams just as a recap, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we all ended up with. Ben had the first pick, and his team consists of Chris Cole as part of the front seven, DeMello Jones at defensive back, Elijah Griffin as part of the front seven, Jaden Riddell at tight end, Dwight Phillips Jr. at running back, CJ Wiley at wide receiver, and Juan Gaston at the offensive line. Kipp had the next pick, started with Chauncey Bowens at running back, Noah Thomas at wide receiver, Ellis Robinson at defensive back, Bo Hewley at offensive line, Xavier McLeod and Jordan Hall in the front seven, and then Ethan Barbour at tight end. I had the third pick and then got the first pick of the next round. Went with Zachariah Branch at wide receiver, Elias Williams at tight end, Quintavious Johnson in the front seven, Daniel Calhoun offensive line, Justin Williams in the front seven, Chris Pill at defensive back, and Bo Walker at running back. Now we're going to go around and just talk about our teams really quickly. Ben, what do you think about the team you put together? And if there was one guy you could have gotten, either that Kipp or I picked, or someone who's just left on your board, who would you have gotten?
Well, when you listed out the full team, I feel really good about all the players that I have, like just my experiences with them and what I think that they are capable of. I feel great about every player that I picked. Whether that will hold up in a pre-spring vote based on where Buzz is right now is maybe where I misfired a little bit. I think that if I could have one player that one of you all had, it would have been Noah Thomas. I was really trying to take him with my second pick, and he just didn't get back around. I think that he's going to have a great year for Georgia, and he just has at 6'6" and the ability to run jet sweeps. They just don't have many. There's not many guys that exist that have the ability to use him in a bunch of different ways like that. If I were to take someone that wasn't on any of our boards, I probably would have taken Nasir Johnson. I think that he's someone that just has the body type to play the nose that Georgia doesn't have a whole lot of. And so I think he's going to have to, play a lot this year. But the same could be said for just about any defensive lineman that was on the list.
All right, Kipp, what'd you think of your team? And then kind of following Ben's pattern there, give me a guy that one of us got that you really wanted, and then someone who none of us picked that you would have liked to gotten a hold of.
Yeah, I think overall I love my team because they're all needed to fill important roles. Like these are guys that Georgia needs to, if not start, but be ready to start. And they're basically going to put them in situations and test them this spring to see if they have what it takes to earn that role. So I think that regardless of whether or not they're all starting this fall, I think they're going to look like starters in the spring because Georgia has to give them the stress test. And so I like from top to bottom the fact that all of them should have big roles. There are two guys that I really, I think Jaden Riddell, going into that Jurasic role, he wasn't ready last year as a freshman, but now he's going to be expected to be that number 3 guy. Maybe even, push for even bigger piece of the pie there, but he's a freak. I mean, he's just explosive, but by far the guy that I would have wanted would be Chris Cole because everyone should be pumped about that guy. I mean, that he just oozes with talent, just an exciting player, an exciting skill set. Like I said, when he took him, I think that was the easy case for the number 1 pick.
I've been sweating that one this whole time, Kipp.
Just because I just think that, I mean, there are flashier positions, but you just lost the Butkus Award winner. You have you're going to be looking for guys to fill a lot of snaps. Small Munden's also gone, kind of a big deal there. And I just think that they're going to take the training wheels off, and just unleash him. And it's a different skill set, but it's just one that should be equally as fun. I mean, that guy can cover running backs, tight ends, wide receivers, and just, he covers a lot of ground. So love that number 1 overall pick. Still think, again, it still makes for a top heavy team, but I do love that pick. And I would have contemplated trading up if I had the opportunity.
I wish you'd have called beforehand. You pulled a Nico Harrison on us, and then no one knew that was an opportunity for us.
Really missed out there. I like my team. I do kind of regret sitting on running back because I knew running back and tight end were going to be very thin. But I still like Bo Walker's opportunities. But once those running backs started going, kind of got stuck there and waited on him. Looking at the other picks, Ben's pick of Elijah Griffin, I was really hoping he was going to hang around just maybe another round. I think Elijah Griffin's a guy that's going to make a lot of noise. And then as far as guys who nobody drafted, this was a guy that I was kind of surprised when undrafted in Sokovie White. He's a guy I've heard really good things about, that he's put in the work. I think he's got an opportunity to be in the mix at the slot position. That, I don't think he's going to be a starter. I think Zachariah Branch is going to be that guy. And by picking Zachariah Branch, Sokovie wasn't an option for me, but I think really highly of him. And then another guy I'll shout out is Joseph Jonah Ajanye. He got a lot of run as a true freshman, and then he gets hurt, winds up having surgery, doesn't play again. I really think we would have seen more of him going through his freshman season, but he gets hurt and is on the mend. So I think really highly of Joseph. Be interested too to see what he's able to do coming off that injury and if he's back to 100%. All right. Appreciate everyone who watched and listened to this draft. As we always do, keep an eye out on Twitter and over on the Junkyard. We will put up polls for you guys to vote who had the best team between Ben, Kipp, and myself. We'll do that probably on Tuesday afternoon and leave those polls up for the rest of the week. And like I mentioned earlier in the episode, we will revisit it after G-Day, see which teams we liked and see which ones just didn't quite hold up like we thought would. We'll wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Ben and Kipp for popping on. Thanks everyone who watched or listened to this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Go to dogs247.com. Right now we have a deal with the first month of your subscription is just $1. A great time to join the site because of all the recruiting news. We've got spring practice in a week. We've got Georgia basketball getting ready for the SEC tournament. And if they keep it up, the NCAA tournament. We've got Georgia baseball in full throttle, already 13-1 on the season. There's honestly not a better time to jump on board. I really couldn't recommend it enough. Go to Dogs247, subscribe there. Follow us on YouTube, on TikTok, wherever you get your podcast, the Junkyard Dawgcast. Make sure and give that a follow. We'll be busy the rest of the week getting ready for spring practice next week. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll be at the South Carolina-Georgia basketball game tonight in Columbia, and then we'll have the regular season finale Saturday in Athens, and that'll be a good one for sure. So we'll wrap up the episode right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.